I published the recordings for the day 1 and day 2. I'll try and get day 3 up by the end of today. And I create a YouTube channel for Tech Girls United where we'll have all our recordings posted, and that's in the announcements channel on Discord. So make sure to check that out, because I know a lot of people have asked me for, recordings of the sessions, and I know that's something that will definitely help out a lot of people who wanted to get more basically like help on these topics. Along with that, we also released our website a few days ago, and I know I've been reminding people a lot about this, but I just really like to see more people subscribe to our newsletter so that we can get, more opportunities out to more people. And apart from that, I just wanted to go over the project really quick. So the project, I'm hoping that you guys can kind of present tomorrow. It's not too formal of a presentation. It's more like you just talk about what you have done with the data and what you have learned from the project. So essentially, I've gone over this a few times, but I'm just going to quickly brief over it again. We have 3 data sets that you can choose from, and then you can just download the data set, import it using pandas or something, and then you can analyze it and really kind of take it apart and analyze the different aspects of it. And then you'll just be talking about what you have learned from, your what you have done with it, what kind of conclusions you have drawn from it, and what kind of skills you have also picked up. And it would be like a 1 to 2 minute talk. It wouldn't be that long or anything. So it would just be you practice with it, and then you tell us what you've learned. And I've also had a few questions from people about the applications of what we've been learning in data science. And I think that's a really great question that we might not have covered so much. So I just want to address that really quickly right now as well. So essentially data science as a topic is just using data to draw some conclusions or make some kind of analysis. So everything we're doing is related to data and kind of being able to take that data and manipulate it in certain ways to kind of figure out some kind of trends or come up with some conclusion. So one example could be, I guess, yesterday's example with Shalini, where she took the baby names and she took all that data and used pandas to try and find out the most popular name by figuring out which name was used the most common. So those kind of things allow you to, analyze data really quickly and draw, quick conclusions. And that's really what data science is about. And you can do the same kind of things with NumPy and Matplotlib, which we'll be going over today. Matplotlib is really good for, graphing and stuff like that. So that's definitely going to be helpful when you're looking for trends and stuff. Like if you're looking for the trend of something over the last few years, you could graph it and it would be really easy to visually depict it. And you could also use those kind of graphs and simulations in reports that you could be using for research in the future. So those are just a few of the applications of what we've been learning in the data science world. If you have any other questions about more specific topics, you can always ask us in the mentor help channel. And if you end up having any other questions about the project or the stuff we go over today or anything you're seeing in the recordings, you can also stick that in there as well. You can also tag us with @mentors so that we all get a notification that you have asked a question and that you need help. So that's all I have. Trisha, do you want to start screen sharing? Or before that, are there any questions about what I just said? I know I said a lot, and I don't know if it was too clear. If you do come up with any questions later. Okay, is tomorrow just going to be us presenting our projects? Yes, that is the plan, just to be presenting the projects. If we do have some time, I might go over some stuff regarding, what you can do next with, what we've learned, regarding maybe machine learning and stuff like that. So just a brief overview of that kind of stuff, but tomorrow we'll be going over the projects, and anything else will be based on how long that takes. So if there aren't any other questions, make sure to put them in the mentor help channel on Discord if you come up with any later. And I'll let Trisha start. Okay, I enable screen sharing permissions, so you should be able to do it right now.
Okay, cool. Can you see my screen?
Oh yeah, also really quick, do you want to put the code and the slides in the chat? We did get a few requests for that. At first, we weren't sure about doing that, but I don't know if we want to try that out now for people who did want it while you were presenting. So
yeah, sure. All right, so I just put the REPL link and the link for the slides in chat. And
Okay, hopefully that helps for anyone who needed those.
So today we're going to be going over Matplotlib, which is another Python library. So what is Matplotlib? So it is a visualization library in Python for 2D arrays. So basically, visualization allows us visual access to huge amounts of data, and it helps in identifying patterns, relationships, and like outliers in your data. And it consists of several plots like line plots, bar graphs, scatter plots, histograms, and so on, which we'll go over. So there's different types of plots, and you've probably seen some of these in like your math class or something. And so we'll just go over like what they're called. So this is a bar graph. You've probably seen this before. This is a histogram. This is a hexagonal bin plot. This is a scatter plot. This is an area plot, and this is a pie chart. And we'll be learning how to plot most of these today. So now let's move on to graphing. So our first example is to create a simple graph. So I'm just going to head over to REPL and we can start. Okay, so there's different ways you can import the Matplotlib library. One way is to write sort of from Matplotlib import pyplot as PLT. So as you can see, this is pretty like similar to what we've basically been doing for the past couple of days, like importing the libraries into our code so that we can use the functions that are available on the packages. So another way you can write this is you can say import matplotlib dot pyplot as PLT. So these basically mean the same exact thing. And there's also other ways that you can import it. There's like other ways that you can write this, but for now we're going to be using the second part just because it is like shorter. Oh, I see someone's cursor. Okay. So basically, if you want to know like what pyplot is, it's basically just Matplotlib's plotting framework. So it helps us when graphing. So now we're going to graph the plot. So to do that, we're going to say PLT, we're going to input the data that we want to plot. So I'm just going to say like 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5, 6. And then to show the graph, we're just going to use the show function. And so we're just going to say like plt.show, like use the show function to show the graph. And I'm just going to run this. I think someone asked, can we use the NumPy and Panda libraries at the same time? Yeah, you can use them at the same time. I got an error. Matplotlib, no module named. Let's see. Oh, sorry, I spelled this wrong. .pyplot. Okay. So you can use NumPy and Pandas at the same time if you want to use them both in your code. So as you can see, this is just like a simple graph. We have our we have our x-axis and we have our y-axis and we have the points that we plotted here. So they're pointed in they're plotted in xy pairs. So we have 1, 4, 2, 5, and then 3, 6, and they're all just plotted on this graph. So it's pretty simple. This is just creating like a simple sort of graph. And does anyone have any like questions on any of like the code that I've covered? Okay, yeah, it's pretty simple. This is just like plotting the simple graph. But as you can see in our graph, we don't have any labels, so it doesn't really make any sense. Like, we don't know what the y-axis or x-axis represents, and we also don't have a title for our graph, so like we really don't know what it represents or like what the data is showing. So another thing is that like usually when we're inputting the data, we don't input the numbers, we usually input them as variables. So we usually assign the list to variables instead, and we put the data into this. So I'll be showing that in Okay, so now we're going to cover how to add titles, labels, and variables. So we're going to use the same statement. We're just going to say import matplotlib.pyplot as plt. And then we're just going to assign, we're going to define two variables, and then we're going to add lists inside. So for x, we're just going to say 1, 2, 3. And then for y, we're just going to write 6, 7, 8. And then so now let's go ahead and plot them. So like I said before, all we're going to do is just say plt.plot, and then we're going to enter in the variables. And then now don't forget to show your graph, because if you don't add this function at the end, your code will just run and you won't have any graph that you can actually see. So make sure to add this at the end of your code. Okay, so in a moment we'll see, yeah, so we have our graph and we have the variables that we inputted, but we still don't have any like labels or any title. So I'm going to go ahead and show how to add that now. So to add the title, we're going to use the title function. We're just going to say plt.title, and then you can basically add any title you want. We're just going to call this simple graph. And then to add a label on the x-axis, we're just going to say plt.xlabel. We're going to use the xlabel function, and then we're just going to call it x-axis for now. And then to add the label on the y-axis, we do the same thing basically. So plt.ylabel, and then we're just going to call it y-axis. Okay. And so we're just going to run this. Oh, my bad. Okay, I forgot to comment out this top code here. So yeah, that sort of created an error. Make sure you're not having like two graphs at the same time. Okay, yeah, so now we have our labels and we also have our title here. So our graph makes like a lot more sense, but it still feels a little bit incomplete because, you know, what if we want to maybe make this line a little bit wider, or we want to add some color to our graph, or maybe even add some lines, some graph lines, some grid lines. So I'll show how to do that now and how to basically add style to your graph. So first, again, we'll just import matplotlib.pyplot as plt, same thing. And then now we want to import the style function so that we can use it. So we're just going to say from matplotlib import style. And then so now we can use that in our code. So now to use the function, we're just going to say style.use, and then inside the parentheses, we're just going to say ggplot. So ggplot is basically a data visualization package, and it's going to help us plot our graph. And now we want to define 4 variables, because what if we want to plot 2 lines? So we're just going to say x equals 1, 2, 3. Y is 6, 7, 8, and then we're going to define an x2 variable and also a y2 variable. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and plot the graphs on our canvas. Okay, let me just move this comment here. Okay, So now we're going to plot them. So we're just going to say plt.plot, the same thing, and then we're just going to input the variables. But now we want to add labels for our lines. So for the first line that's going to plot these two variables, I want to label it line 1. So what I'm just going to do is write label equals and then line 1. And I also want to add like a color for this graph. So to add color, what you're basically going to do is just put the string of the letter of the color that you want to add. So there's different colors in Matplotlib. I actually attached a resource on the resources page that you can refer to if you want to add like different colors. But G basically represents green. Okay, so now that we've got the color for this line and the label, we're going to add a line width, and then we're just going to assign it to 5. And we're basically going to do the same thing for the next line, except we're going to put in the x2 and y2 variables. And now we're going to add the title for the graph, and we're just going to call it info. Basically the same thing that we did before. We're going to add the x label and the y label. So we're just going to call this x-axis. And you can basically call it whatever you want, or whatever like pertaining to what you're actually graphing. And then now we want to show the legend. So to do that, we're just going to write plt.legend, and you can see in a second when we run this that there's a legend on the graph. So, okay, after we showed this function, now we're going to run it. Oh, okay. Well, these numbers are a little bit weird, but as you can see, you have the lines on your graph, and you have these like sort of grid lines, and you also have a legend over here. And okay, I forgot to add a color for this. Okay. So as you can see, I assigned the same color to both the lines, so it basically looks like it's representing the same thing. But if I add a different color to one of them, when I add a different color to one of them, it's easier to sort of differentiate your data. So yeah. Does anyone have any questions on adding titles, labels, graphing a simple graph, or sort of adding colors, or anything that I basically covered so far? Okay, cool. So now we'll move on to the next example, which is how to plot bar graphs. So to do this, we need to understand what bar graphs are. Okay. So bar graphs are used to compare things between different groups or measure large. As you can see, this is actually the example that we're going to plot, but this is an example of a bar graph. You've probably seen this before. It has an x-axis and a y-axis, and it's usually good for graphing categorical data. And now we can just move on to an example. Okay, so we're going to start again with the import statement. So import matplotlib.pyplot as plt. So next, instead of using plt.plot, we'll use plt.bar, and we can fill it in with data, or you can define variables that you want to use. So we'll say plt.bar, and then we'll just go ahead and input the data. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then 6, 7, 2, 3, 5. And I also want to add a label for these bars, so I'm just going to call it, I'm just going to say label equals, we'll call it example 1. Okay, So now I'll create one more plot and I'll fill in the data, and I'll also define the color so that you can differentiate the bars. So the default color on Matplotlib is actually a blue, but you can also like change the color as I showed before. So if I wanted to change the color, I could just yeah, I could just say something like C. Okay. So now we'll just fill in the data for the second set of bars. Okay. And you also want to make sure that you have the same number of data set, like values that you're entering. Like you can't have like 4 in this and like 5 in this, because it will give you an error. So you want to make sure that you're corresponding the number of like elements in each list. Okay, so now we'll just add the legend, and we'll add a title. We'll just call it bar graph, and we'll show our graph. Okay. Oh, we got an error. Okay. Okay, so as you can see, we have 2 sets of sort of like different like data sets. We have our first set of bars and we have our second set, and you can really differentiate the data now that the colors are like different. And we have also like a legend over here, and we also have a title. So that's basically how to like create a simple bar graph. It's basically the same thing, except you use .bar instead of .plot. And I guess that's actually pretty much it. So yeah, we'll move on to the next example. Okay, so now we'll move on to how to plot histograms. So what is a histogram? A histogram is used to show frequency distribution, and unlike a bar graph, which is used to show categorical data, it shows quantitative data. So it's actually a type of bar graph, but like I said, it's used to show frequency. So you can actually see an example of a histogram right here. This is the one that we'll plot now, but let me show you the example. Okay, so we're going to start the same way. We're just going to say import matplotlib.pyplot as plt. So next, we want to define sort of like 2 variables. So we have population ages over here, which is just like basically a list with a bunch of values in it. And then we have bins, which is another list with a bunch of like multiple numbers. And so we want to plot these. So again, instead of using plt.plot or plt.bar, we're going to use plt.hist. And in this, we're going to input the population ages and the bins. And we want to define the hist type as bar. So you'll see in a moment what that represents. And we're just going to put the width of the lines of the bars using our width. We're going to define that as 0.8. And now we'll just label the axes, plt.xlabel. I'm just going to call it x, and we'll do the same thing for y. And then we'll just do plt.title. So again, a lot of the same sort of functions that you're using. We're just going to call it histogram. And then lastly, don't forget to show your graph. Okay. Okay, so as you can see, we have the histogram here. So instead of just plotting sort of categorical versions of data, we're plotting more of like a frequency. So as you can see, the people who sort of have like lower ranges of whatever we're trying to plot, population ages, you can see sort of like the frequency distribution in this graph. So Matplotlib is actually really good, again, for like visualizing large amounts of data and sort of like inputting like all like these large amounts, and you can also sort of like make decisions based on like the trends that you can see. Okay, so I see a lot of like things in the chat. Why did you put the G and C in the plot line? So G and C basically represents colors. So if you wanted to add any colors to your graph, you would use G or C. So you would say something like color equals like G, or you could just use the string G that just represents like green if you want to like make your line or your bar green. Yeah, it's for the color. When it comes to plt.show, what can we put inside the parentheses, or do we have to leave it blank? So usually you would just leave it blank because that function is basically just used to show your graph. So you have all this code and then it's just used to show it. Okay, so I'll move on to the next example. Does anyone have any questions like specifically relating to like histograms or like how to graph these? Is population ages on the x-axis in the histogram? So yes, so as you can see here, when we input x and y, we input it in the same order. So we have bins here, and then we have population, wait, yeah, okay, yeah. So we have bins here on the y-axis, and we have population ages here on the x-axis. Okay. Yeah, I'll move on to the next example now. So, how to plot a scatter plot. So again, like we need to know what a scatter plot is in order to plot it. So what is it used for? So we use scatter plots to compare two variables to look for sort of a correlation or growth. In your math class, you might have heard of like positive correlation or like negative association or something like that. It's used to see the correlation between data points and like some data sets. As you can see in this graph or this example here, there's actually no correlation, but we're going to go ahead and show this in the example. Okay, so again, we're going to start with import matplotlib.pyplot as plt. And then so now we'll just define two lists. I actually already have them here, x for x and y. These again are like the data points that we want to plot, so they're plotted in pairs. So we have like 1, 5, 2, 2, 3, 4. But instead of in a line like graph, they're plotted as points instead of connected. So like we used before, plt.plot, plt.bar, and then .hist. This time we're going to use plt.scatter to plot scatter plots. And then we're just going to enter in the x and the y variables. And we're just going to label it skitscat. So you'll see this in a moment. And we're going to assign the color as K. So some of you are asking, like, how, like, what do these, like, letters mean? So K is basically a color, and K actually defines, like, the black color. So you can see in a moment that, like, our data points will be black. And then next we'll label the axes and the legend. So plt.x label, we'll just call it x, and then we'll do the same thing for y, and then we'll just add a legend, and then we'll add a title, scatterplot, and then we'll show our graph. Okay. Are the points in pairs for the histogram? So the points are actually not necessarily in pairs. They're sort of graphed based on frequency. I'll get back to that in like a minute. So as you can see, we have our scatter plot here. Like I said, we defined the color as K, which is black. So as you can see, our points are black. We added this label, scat. So as you can see, since we use the legend function to show the legend, we have our legend over here. And we have all of our intervals and all of our points graphed on this. So as you can see in this graph, there's no correlation like I mentioned before, but usually you can find some kind of negative association, positive, or like this one, no association. Okay, so as for the histogram, let me just comment this part out. Okay, so your question was, are the points in pairs for the histogram? So the points aren't in, like they're not plotted in pairs. So we have our population ages on the x-axis, then we have our bins on the y-axis, and they're actually plotted according to the frequency. So we have, like, from 0 to 20, we have all the population ages that are from in between 0 and 20, and then we have all of them that are in between this amount of bins. So it's sort of not based so much on like categorical data, so it's not based on like you're plotting like 1,2. It's based on more of like how many data points are in this like certain data set. So like how many of this population ages are between 0 and 20. Does that like make a little bit more sense? Okay, cool. Okay. Yeah, so if you would like to learn more about like sort of histograms, like maybe some examples on histograms, like real world problems, definitely just like go ahead and look it up. There's like a lot of great examples online, so yeah. Okay, so now we'll move on how to plot area graphs. So most of like scatter plots and bar graphs and like histograms you usually see them like in a math class, but I feel like most people aren't really familiar with what area graphs are, so let's go ahead and explain this too. So area graphs are used to track changes over time for one or more groups. They are good to use when tracking the changes between two or more unrelated groups that make up the whole category, and it is also known as a stacked area graph. So as you can see in this whole, you can see that the purple makes up this portion of the graph, the blue makes up this portion, the red makes up this portion. So it's sort of used to show like columns of data or like stacks of data that represent like out of a whole. Okay, so now we'll get to an example. So again, we're just going to import matplotlib.pyplot as plt. And we have these 4 variables, and inside we have lists defined. So sleeping, eating, working, and playing. So with polygons, we can't have like labels for our data. So what we're going to do is create empty lines, and we're going to give them the same color and correct labels in accordance with our graph. So I'll basically show how to do that. So we're in accordance with all of our variables that we defined, we're going to have empty sort of like lines for this. So this is sleeping, eating, working, and then playing. Okay. And then as you can see, for each of these, I've defined a color. I'm actually going to change the color so you can differentiate them. And then we've added the line width of 5. And then obviously we also added the label. Okay. And then now I'll just add the axes, titled, and the legend. So basically the same thing, plt.xlabel, x, and then y label. We'll just call it area graph. And then we'll show the legend. and then we'll do plt.show. Okay. Okay, so something, oh my bad. So I forgot to actually show the stack plot. So like I said before, using bar and hiss and sort of like scatter, we're actually gonna use plt.stackplot. And inside this, we're gonna enter all of our sets of like data. Oh, I forgot to add the days here too. I'm gonna say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. So in this, we're gonna enter all of our sets of data. So we have days, we have sleeping, eating, working, playing, and yeah, that's it. And then, so again, we're also going to define the colors in here. So M, C, R, and then K. And then we'll go ahead and run this, and I'll actually show the graph. Okay. Okay, so something actually went wrong with this. Let me try to find my error. Okay, so ideally it would basically produce something like this, where you have sort of these like bars or like columns of like sort of stacked data that show out of like how much do you do out of a whole. So in this example, it's like sleeping, eating, working, playing. So like how much would you do out of like a whole, maybe like a day. Yeah, so unfortunately in this example, something went wrong. For some reason, like I can't locate what happened. So yeah, I'm not sure. I will come back to this a little bit later. Megan, can you see like anything that seems like off here?
I'm not too familiar with Matplotlib myself, so I can't really tell, but I think, you can like come back to it later. Maybe if you can't figure it out during the session, you can, like do it afterwards and then like send an update in the announcements channel.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, so yeah, or I can like try to figure out like what went wrong. Yeah, maybe we'll just like come back to that later. Okay, so yeah, so ideally the code that I entered should produce something like this in this example. I'm not sure why this is only showing this. We have only sleeping, which is weird. Okay, anyway, so we'll come back to this example a little bit later. Yeah. Okay. So now we'll go over how to plot a pie chart. So pie charts are used to show parts compared to a whole. So they're similar to stack plots, and except they're used only for a certain point in time. So you've probably seen pie charts before. You have sort of like a circle, and you have slices inside that represent obviously like certain percentages of the whole. So now I'll go ahead and show an example. Hopefully this one will work. So we're going to import matplotlib.pyplot as plt.
Also, I'm not sure if there's a question in the chat that you haven't answered yet. if you want to take a look at that.
Okay, sure. Can we put inside of the square brackets the name of the column in a data set? What do you mean? Do you mean in this example? The column of the data set? Why do we put square brackets to plot the area graph? So yeah, so like I mentioned before, so we can't add like labels because there's like no specific like lines to it. So what we wanted to do was just add like empty lines and then add colors to those so that we could sort of show them in the legend. So if you can see like in this example over here, we have a legend that's like associated with the colors, but we can't normally do that with like a stack plot or an area graph. So we wanted to add like empty lines to represent the colors. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yeah, we'll move on to, like I was saying, how to plot pie charts. So yeah, we'll import Matplotlib, and then we'll define a couple of variables. Instead of putting the number in sleeping, can we put the name of a certain column? The name of a column. Do you mean like sort of like a set of like data? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. So yeah, you can basically, you don't have to like use these data sets. You can basically define like any sort of, oh, you mean in here. Oh no, yeah. So basically for this, I'm basically making like empty lines. So I'm not like entering in the data values, because if I were to like use this, then it would only plot the lines and it wouldn't plot like the area graph. So to plot like that, I need to use plt.stackplot. And then so for all of these, I'm actually just plotting the empty lines and then defining the colors so that I can show them in the legend. But no, I wouldn't input like sort of the data into these parentheses because they're just like empty lists. Okay, I'll get back to plotting pie charts. Okay, so yeah, we need to import Matplotlib, and then now we're just going to define some variables for our data. So ignore this right here for now. I'll come back to that later. So we're just going to define slices. We're going to have activities, which is going to be like the same thing: sleeping, eating, working, and then playing. So again, it's basically representing the same data from the last example. And then we're also going to define another list called colors. Okay. So Matplotlib already handles the sort of sizes of the slices, and so all we basically need to do is like enter in the numbers in the data. So we already know the colors and the labels, and so let me sort of explain like what this sort of represents here. So the start angle is basically where you want to sort of start your graph. So we want to start it at like a 90-degree angle, which is like basically what you do generally. You can sort of like change this. We'll sort of like experiment with it and like see how that like changes the graph, and maybe like it'll make a little bit more sense. But yeah, we basically just want to define the start angle as 90 so that our graph can start and like look like it's not lopsided. So, and then explode, or let me start with shadow. Shadow basically adds like a shadow to your graph. This is optional, like you don't need to have this here. It's basically like another thing for like styling. Explode basically takes sort of a certain piece in your pie chart out, and depending on which like data value that you want to take out, you put in the value 0.1. So I'll actually show that in a second. Name colors is not defined. Okay, yeah. So we want to make sure that we're using the same name. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So as you can see, like I was explaining, for explode, it sort of takes a slice of the graph out. So this slice is taken out, which represents eating, and in this order of the list, eating is the second sort of like data set. So I would put 0.1. So if I wanted to take out sleeping, for example, then I would do like 0.1, comma 0, comma 0. And then if I wanted to take out no slices, I would just do 0, 0, 0, 0. So yeah, as you can see, sleeping is taken out. So any value that you want to be sort of taken out and like shown a little bit more emphasis, you would substitute that with 0.1. And then autopact basically overlays the percentages on the graph. So as you can see, there's percentages on here. So if you want to add percentages, you would just use this line right here. And yeah, that's basically how to create a pie chart. Does anyone have any questions on any of this code? I know it looks like a little bit new, and I know this might seem a little bit confusing, but it's actually the same thing that we've been covering before. It's actually just in like a different sort of format. And I just like indented these lines, but it basically means the same thing as if I was saying like plt.py slices comma labels equals activities, and just like defining all these things inside this function.
Okay, really quick, I think I know what's wrong with the one above. Something just clicked while you were speaking, so if you can go back up. So where you, yeah, to the previous example. So you had color is equal to, and then you had the list. I think it's meant to be colors, not, so there's a S missing. No, not there, not there. On the plt.stackplot. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, yeah. Thank you, Megan. Yeah.
So what happened? Oh yeah. So what happened there essentially is that it was graphing all of those, but with the same color, like the same one color. Because okay, so from what I can see, I think color just indicates that you're going to be using only one color, and then when you use colors, it's kind of looking for multiple colors in the graph. So when she wrote color, it picked up the first color, which was the color that I displayed for all four of the categories. Whereas when we had colors, it looked at the four different colors and then plotted those accordingly.
Yeah, that definitely be aware for that, and make sure to like make sure you're like being keen of like all the sort of S's that you're adding. So yeah, as you can see, we have our area graph that's like more than one color, and we have all of our data that's like sort of mapped out on this graph. And yeah, basically the variable name had to be changed. So yeah, I wrote colors as color with just one S. So like Megan said, it only showed one color instead of showing all the colors that I wanted to be displayed. Okay, so does anyone have any questions on like any of the examples that I've shown, whether it's like the histogram or like the bar graph or like the area graph?
I think we did get another question in the chat.
Oh, okay. How do we know what to put inside the parentheses for autopacked? So autopacked basically takes in this value. I'm actually not too sure what it sort of represents, but you can actually look it up. Let's see, autopacked.
For these kind of scenarios, one thing I typically like to do is try putting in different values to see how the code changes and the result changes. That's something that I found really helpful when I'm like dealing with stuff that I'm unfamiliar with.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So let's see. Enables you to display the percent values. So yeah. And then for each web type, and the format string is a numerical percent value for the wedges. Okay, so I think it basically sort of displays your graph in a different way. So let's try using this, like trying different things out, like Megan mentioned. Oh wait, sorry. Okay, so for this one, I don't think it displayed the percent signs. So it just displayed like the numbers, the number percentages. So yeah, there's like different sort of ways that you can use some of these, and I think maybe just like doing some research, or maybe if you want to do a project, like following some kind of like example, can like really help you like learn about like all these different things, because there's like probably like even more ways to sort of display these percentages. So like yeah, just like trying different things out.
Yeah, and going off of that, I know like when you start programming, there are so many things that go on in like the programming world, and program like code keeps like evolving, especially like the trends and stuff like that. So what a lot of people use and what's really helpful in the industry is to be able to practice stuff and also be able to use your resources. So I know like the website Trisha just went to, Stack Overflow, is something a lot of programmers like to use when they're trying to figure out different bugs in their code or trying to learn how to do things. So that's definitely something you guys should look into when you're trying to do more. Like, of course, this program is a week long and we can't cover everything in this short week, but there's so much you can do with programming, and everything is available online in today's, century. And so it's really like important that you guys also know how to go online and also like look into these kind of things. Especially, like I said, Stack Overflow is a really good website for like debugging.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's also like a lot of other great resources that you can use. And there's obviously like also GitHub, where you can like look at what other people are doing and like also maybe learn some new things from there. So does anyone have any other questions on like anything that I covered so far, like any of these graphs? So yeah, I can maybe like explain the colors a little bit more. So yeah, I think someone in the comment section mentioned that C is for like cyan, which is like this like blue that you see here, this lighter blue. And then we have this B for the darker blue, the R for the red, and then the N for magenta. So there's actually like a whole list of like Matplotlib colors, like I mentioned before, and I like linked a resource if you want to like look into that, or like maybe choose a different color. It's on the resources page. Yeah, W3 schools is very helpful, especially like when you're like a beginner and you want to just like learn about like all the different ways you can do things. It has like lists of all kinds of like methods and functions that are available on Python and like in libraries too. So yeah, I definitely recommend that too.
Yeah, they have interactive like demos and stuff as well that you can like tinker with on their site. So that's also really helpful. I've definitely used that in the past.
Okay, so if no one has any other questions or maybe has questions later, I guess we'll just move on for now. So now we'll cover, I think Megan was talking a little bit on this in the beginning. So like how are these things used in data science and like how can you use it if you are planning to like be a data scientist? So basically, Matplotlib is a great tool for visualization and graphics, and it provides like a strong foundation for like these other libraries like ggplot, like I mentioned before, pandas, which we covered yesterday, like PyTorch, and there's a lot of like other libraries, and also the packages can help create like charts, web-ready plots, graphical layouts, like as we've seen with all the graphs that we've learned how to graph today. And it is basically used to get the visualization or the graphical representation of the data. And then if you'd like to learn more, I've actually linked some articles on the resources page here. If you want to learn more about like how it's used in data science and more about like data visualization, definitely check these out. Or if you want to like learn even more, definitely just like Google Matplotlib and data visualization and like graphing and like all these things. There's like a whole like there's like so many resources and like links that you can like look at and that are very, very helpful. So I definitely recommend just like Googling it if you're like also curious. Yeah, you're welcome. So that's basically everything that I've prepared. But like if anyone has any other questions on like everything that I've gone over so far, because I know it might be like a lot.
Oh, I see a question in the chat about using REPL. So REPL is personally like what we use just for this so that we can share our code really easily. But I would say for bigger data science projects, something that I found is really popular is Jupyter Notebook. It's something you have to install on your computer, but it's really good for visualizing stuff. Like I know like Shalini yesterday was like talking about data frames, and REPL didn't give us a really like good picture of the data frames as such, but Jupyter really allows us to do like a lot more with data, and it's definitely more compatible with bigger data science projects. And of course, like uploading on GitHub is something you should definitely get accustomed to since that is something a lot of people do today with their code. Yep, no problem.
Okay, cool. Does anyone have any other questions? So yeah, you guys can sort of like tinker around with like what I've sort of like wrote here, like maybe add different colors, like I said, or like add different things, like maybe like change the labels, change some of like the data sets, or like basically just like do whatever you want. And like I think just like experimenting, I think Shalini said this, like it really helps like learn a lot more about like all these like different libraries, especially like if you're not really familiar with like coding or like learning syntax. I think it's just really helpful to just like sort of experiment, maybe do some like research, maybe like look at other projects. So I think yeah, that's definitely helpful for like learning more. So I know this like looks like a lot, but it's definitely I think after just like learning like what each like line of code does or like how this sort of like works, like even just like learning what this does, like what the plot dot this does, and like what this population dot ages represents, and like learning it like line by line. It might seem like a lot, but I think that definitely helps too. So yeah.
Yep, practice is really important with these kind of things, especially like, maybe after like going through the slides again. If you need more help, maybe try creating another REPL or creating another project and trying to write out lines of code on your own and see how much you can do on your own, because that really helps with trying to learn this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, or you can unmute right now as well.
I also included like some like quick steps to like follow on the slides, and also like how the example should like basically look like with the data sets from like the Replit link. And yeah, that's pretty much it. If anyone has any like other questions, like you can even be like general questions about like Matplotlib and like data science or like anything. Feel free to just like ask.
Okay, so I think we're. Oh wait, there's another question. Okay.
What are the next steps you'd recommend to take from here? Um, yeah, so I definitely recommend just like learning basically all of these examples. I think these are like really like the basics of like the Matplotlib library, and then also like checking out the links that I linked to like learn how these like help in data science. And then also I linked another resource to sort of like learn PyPlot, and I think learning like that, and then maybe how to plot like other graphs. I think like I mentioned before, like there's other kinds of ways you can sort of represent data, like there's like these hexagonal bin plots. So maybe like learning different types of graphs and different types of plots, and like checking out like a bunch of resources. That's what I'd recommend.
Yeah, and to add on to that, like I said before, practice. So maybe like coming up with your own project, like finding maybe some kind of data set you'd want to analyze, maybe something you're interested in. Like if you were interested in like the trends in like technology usage, you could find a data set on that, and then you could start, applying what you've learned to try and, see what you can do. Those kind of, practice projects also are really helpful in this kind of thing, and those would definitely be something you want to try out. Also, for the next questions, I would say data science is a really broad topic. So, I mean, I guess you could say like they are really like fundamental concepts that will be useful. But I feel like there are so many other, aspects of data science. Like data is also used in stuff like machine learning and other topics. So when you go down those kind of roads, you're gonna have to learn a few more things. But these libraries and stuff like that are also really fundamental aspects of different aspects such as machine learning. So hopefully that helped. If there are any other questions, make sure to add them in the chat as well.
Yeah, I think like I mentioned, just like or like Megan mentioned, just like experimenting, with researching, and then also like learning from your mistakes. Like as we saw like today, like I didn't write like colors instead of like color, and like also like seeing like how these like little things can like affect like your code, and like also like produce errors. So don't be discouraged by the errors. Like just try to see what's wrong. Maybe like comment up some code. Like I think that's also like a really great way to like learn things, is to also like make mistakes and then like see how you can fix them.
Yeah, so okay, so perfect. So I think that's all we have. And I definitely agree with what Trisha said. Like definitely making mistakes is a huge step in trying to learn these things. So right now, I mean, after this session, just make sure to like work on your project a bit. See, like basically practice, right? Just practice with the data sets that we've given you. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible to get started trying to apply these things in a real life scenario. So definitely like try practicing, and tomorrow we're really excited to see what kind of things you guys come up with. So um, I'll put the attendance thing in the chat, and make sure to fill that out soon before it closes, likely within an hour. So, okay, I've put it in the chat. Trisha, did you have anything else you wanted to show?
I think that was pretty much it.
Okay, so that's all we have. Thank you everyone for coming today. I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with for tomorrow.